What we want to do here today with you, and in an interactive session, we want to talk about data governance and to enable secondary raw material management. And I have noticed in my professional life that with the topic of data and data, messing around with data, you don't get people very hot. But once you interest people, then I think then it really comes to the point where you can make an impact. So that's why I'm also quite happy that we will hopefully have an impact here today. And who is we? I want to, know, you introduce yourself maybe first.
Yes, hi, that's Susanne, by the way. And I'm Kirsten. I think we sort of like all know each other or introduced each other for the audience online. So I'm Kirsten, I'm working at Emper, and Susanne and I, we are both part of the FutuRam project, which is a future availability of secondary raw materials, and this workshop is part of this project. And we want to use also your knowledge, your input to drive our project forward and to really understand the needs and what we have to do to enable our framework that we will discuss later. And I think with this we can start, Susanne, right?
Yeah. Okay. Then so yeah, one of the aspects of sharpening how to deal with data is actually first to talk about language. And I'm not sure how many languages we speak in this room all jointly. I would guess possibly it's around 10 or so. And even if we speak one language, we may not always understand the same with things. And this makes to deal in the data space quite challenging. So we choose the title. We had a bit last minute to submit a proposal for this session, and we came up with a title. And if you then before the conference go into it to prepare your input, then you sit with the title and say, oh, what did we mean with this? And this is what we did a couple of days ago. And so maybe, and I always then use Wikipedia to better understand what I did myself. So I was searching for some definitions, and if we look at maybe the first term, management, it's the organization and preparation and execution of decision. If we go one step further, if we talk about governance, is a process of making and enforcing, so once more enforcing decisions through laws, norms, rules, and guidelines. And data is factual information used for calculation, discussions, and reasoning. So we see quite a wide spectrum with things we can do with data. And yeah, maybe I leave for now out the secondary raw materials. We are here in the in a group where I think many people work with raw materials, secondary, primary raw materials, but we come to this a bit later. So why do we need data in order to manage and in order to govern? And that was something, no, that's here, is what I want to discover a little bit with you. And if we have now a decision, go to America, what data do we need? Or what data do you need? Yeah.
Dates?
Dates?
The dates of when you're going?
Oh.
Dates, for example, when are you going to America?
Okay.
That's information. How many people are going? If you're going with someone else.
More data?
Transport modes and prices.
Okay.
Maybe specific locations and where we could go and where we could stay.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing that I was thinking is I need a map, nothing else. But so we see there are many different interpretations somehow for this. If we now say a new decision, we go to America by autonomous driving or sailing, what data do we need?
Weather data? For sailing.
Yeah.
It's not really data, it's capability, I mean.
We need a GPS.
GPS. So, and the GPS has lots of data. So yeah, so we see it gets much more complex, and actually also because you need to maybe get to the harbor first. We are in Geneva, not yet at the sea. So and then we need also real-time information about the location of the others, not only about where we are currently. So it gets more complex, and the question is, do we have access to those data? Now the last task is discover a new continent. What data do we need?
That is actually a new continent. A list of existing continents.
Okay. So we have to zoom out. We have to maybe go beyond, and actually it's such an unclear task that we don't know which data we all need then for executing this task. So somehow this also just was to illustrate that data need to fit purpose, data need to be accessible, available, and to be somehow also harmonized. So if we now come to secondary raw materials and the and data management in the circular economy, the interesting part of many illustrations of circular economy, I try always to work with circles, but it's quite hard if you talk about data flows. I never managed to get it into a circle. So if you have a good illustration to show it more circular, we are quite happy. So here you see a typical value chain from mining all the way to final disposal, and the green arrow is then linking somehow making it to a not so circular cycle so far. We have inflows and outflows, and we choose for now in also our project, which will be introduced by Kirsten in a bit, secondary raw materials as materials and products which can be used as raw materials by simple reuse or via recycling and recovery, and be reintroduced into the value chain, mostly at the level of raw material fabrication or, yeah. So this just as an illustration. So you see many processes. As a process engineer, I always love process flow schemes. So there are processes in the boxes, and there are flows that are the arrows connecting it. And each of those items in the system is related to specific data. And what we, in preparation of the workshop, also try to illustrate a little bit, we have certain regulatory frameworks. So in policy making, we need to make policy decisions, and there are associated certain reporting and monitoring aspects in that system. So I went to a number of those frameworks, which are typically related to secondary raw material management. And one of them is the Waste Framework Directive, including the subsequent EPR policies as implemented here in Europe for batteries, ELVs, for packaging, and what did I miss? The batteries, the ELVs, and waste electronics. So, and before we then look at which data are being reported, it's always good to look at the objective, because this is the ultimate goal. And if we look in the Waste Framework Directive, it's laid out that the directive lays out measures to protect the environment, human health by preventing or reducing the generation of waste, the adverse impact of generation and management of waste, and to reduce the overall impact of resource use. So quite a wide spectrum of aspects, of objectives. And this is also what we see. So it's quite environmental driven, what we also see then in the reporting and the monitoring later on. So if we look at it at the data requirements, then we are here pretty much in, oops, no, how does that work? Sorry. We see here very much in the green. So we talk about collection of waste. We talk about treatment, final disposal. We have done certain reporting on secondary raw materials. I placed it dotted because there are not fully described systems that you have really an overall flow what goes back into primary production. They're just reporting on treatment efficiencies. And we have this green dot between manufacturing and reuse for products, and only for the products that are under producer responsibility schemes. There is sort of a registration, so we know what was put on the market, or at least no, maybe it's better to say we know what had been officially registered to be put on the market. So there are certain flow information. If we now go, and in the previous panel discussion, there was lots of information also from about the digital product passport. This is an information tool under the so-called eco-design and for sustainable products regulation, which is the successor or of the eco-design directive, which is a draft proposal from March last year. And they're going maybe one step back to the objective. So the objective here is the regulation establishes a framework to improve environmental sustainability. So we are, again, at the environmental side, but also directing already in the sustainability by setting eco-design requirements. And so this very much is in the focus on product placed on the markets with specific information demand on the manufacturing, but it has a bit of indirect aspects. So because these eco-design requirements should cover a number of aspects like product reusability, lifetime upgradability, but also recyclability and recycled content. So in consequence, if the proposal as it is now will come through, will generate quite a number of data which is not covered by the present waste reporting. Now we come to the last piece in the puzzle, which is the Critical Raw Material Act, which had been introduced also in various sessions here at this conference already. We have the draft proposal. I think that is not correct. It's not from March 23, or I'm not sure of the latest version. So there is stated that the matter and scope, the general objective is to improve functioning of internal markets, to ensure the union's access to secure to a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. So it's a bit a different scope than the EPSR framework and the Waste Framework Directive, and that will result to various flow information very much upfront in the mining waste part. There are certain reporting on very defined products that are put on the market, which will have reporting on in which product that is, and there is a very broad target of assuring a secondary raw material contribution to the European consumption of 15%. So we will see also out of this framework coming a number of information. But it's not harmonized. And if you are asked how many tons of critical raw materials do we actually have today and in the future available for recycling? This is a question that cannot be answered, and that's why there was a call in the Horizon Europe for projects, and Kirsten will introduce you the project that got funding under this with this question giving on the way.
Yes, thank you, Susanne. Can I have the, yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, FutuRam, it's the knowledge on the availability and recoverability of secondary raw material within the EU. We have a special focus on critical raw material, and we are looking at scenarios from now to 2050. Furthermore, we want to disseminate this via a secondary raw material knowledge base, and enable therefore fact-based decision-making for our policies, as we've heard earlier. What waste streams are we looking at? We are looking at 6 different waste streams. These are batteries, end-of-life vehicles, waste electronics, slags and ashes, construction and demolition waste, and last but not least, mining waste. I think most of you already know this. And our scope is really to establish a methodology as well as a reporting structure and a guidance to improve the raw material knowledge base up to 2050. I think that's important to keep that in mind, that it's one of our scopes, or that this is our scope. And also to integrate secondary raw material and critical raw material data to model their current stocks and flows. I think that's also important, that we need the data and that we want to integrate them and that we want to use the data. But therefore, we also need to understand how this data is governed, where this data is collected, and how to get access to this data. Yeah, and of course, we want to consider economic, technology, and geopolitical and all these things as well, of course. Here you have another overview of the scope, as I mentioned earlier, and as you can see, it's a little bit similar than the flowcharts that Susanne was showing. We also have the extraction and production, then we have the use, and we have the treatment and recovery. We want to model this for today, but also for 2050 with several scenarios, as I mentioned earlier. So how did we start? And I think it's really important to understand that we need to define and standardize and harmonize first, to have a common language, as Susanne said at the beginning, and we tried to set this common language today for us. And this is also what we did in FutuRam. So we had the different frameworks and EU binding policies, as well as standards, frameworks, previous projects, statistical frameworks, but also new concepts that we are developing or that we try to give new thoughts to or enable further. And so that is one of our goals in FutuRam, to not be like working, as many people said, like in a silo, but rather to really make sure that the FutuRam puzzle piece fits into the existing frameworks and that existing data can be used to enable our framework. I think that is one of the important aspects to understand, and what is the goal of FutuRam, to really use what's there, to show the blind spots, and then really enable this. This is our model. As I mentioned earlier, we have 6 different waste streams, which makes the different models or the scope or the framework quite large, because we don't only have the product-centric waste streams, we also have mining waste and slags and ashes, which of course have total different data collection, total different data needs, also different data models than the put on market approach that is being used for the product-centric waste streams. So I think that has to be considered, and that we need data to fill all of those boxes, and to understand all of these boxes, and to make, to really show not just on a high level, like the data that is currently used, but really on a CRM level. And that is quite challenging. And here you can also see, as Susanne mentioned earlier, our definition of secondary raw material. How to enable the framework. So how to enable this. So FutuRam, I want to give you an example for FutuRam on the composition data concept. So there we have like a layered principle. It's based on the ProSim approach. So we really try to work with existing work and not reinvent the wheel. So we start with waste streams. And these waste streams contain products, for the product-centric, of course, only for the stock and for the mining waste and slags and ashes. We have different approaches. These products contain components, component contain material, material contain element. So in the end, this is our method, our concept that we want to apply to really understand the different layers within the waste stream. And we aim that if we don't get data for all of the layers, that our model can infer how, for example, data from components to data on an element level infer to the component level or the other way around. So how do we want to do this? I also want to give you an example for that. So we call it key level, and I want to give the example of aluminium. So we're going really into detail into different levels. So we start with aluminium and aluminium alloys. Maybe you have information about that. So you can give us the information how much aluminium you have in a certain waste stream of CDW, construction demolition waste. That's already a good knowledge, but it doesn't help us a lot because there's no information about like critical raw materials and so forth and so on and how it can be recovered. Then if you have more information, you can say wrought aluminium or cast aluminium. Then you can even go further down into the different standards which are used to classify this wrought aluminium. And then you can even go further down there and go to a specific alloy with a specific concentration. And there you can even see if we have this data and combine the standardized data, which is used on the production sites with the end of life data, we can maybe get more knowledge and infer the knowledge from here, like top down or bottom up, depending on what data we have, to really understand not just that there's an aluminium, but also the other elements in there, for example, magnesium or manganese or silicon. So that is what we are trying to infer to using data from standards, but also existing composition data, for example, from ProSum. And that's what is our idea, to then get really the holistic approach and really understand flows within our composition data within in the waste streams. I think then we come to our first question, because as you can here see, we want to use the input data, and then FutuRam is somehow modeling it and using this data, and then we get the output data. And with this, I want to hand over again to Susanne to, discuss our first pain point, what we want to discuss with you. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, maybe one step back. And if we talk about data governance, we now could talk about the governance of the data that go in, because the model is as good as the data that goes in. We also could talk about the governance on the output data. Also there, it's part of the project on exploitation and on making it accessible. Maybe that we keep for the next conference, then more towards the end of the project, that we talk about the output data governance. What we wanted to use this workshop for is to actually focus here on the input data part and somehow see, okay, what in this approach that Kirsten presented is available. How can we also improve for the future? Because it's not only doing it in a 4-year project, but it's also doing it on the long term. And I think it's not very sustainable for the Commission to ask one project after the other to do this type of exercise, but to have it more for the long run. And as what looked now so easy, what Kirsten said to the aluminium example, if you ask at end of life in a recycling and take out a piece of scrap metal and ask then the operation manager which aluminium is this, he would not be able to show the table on composition that you showed. So data on composition is something that I think we need to define it better, because it's used for various purposes. It's used for product passport to calculate impacts, but it's also used then to forecast future availability, but also future demand of raw materials, for example. And we need this information at different aggregation levels. So if we again take an example now, not going to America, but taking the car that brings you with autonomous driving to America, how would you define the composition of this car? So which are, let's say, the preferred data sources you would tap on, or you want to tap on, or you suggest to tap on? Maybe to take an easier example, this table here, what's the composition of this table?
You could check if the manufacturer provides data about the composition.
Yeah.
The product specifications, like like the product specifications in the instructions. I don't know, something like there, maybe.
The first website in Google saying composition of table.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so it's very much driven on the let's say production side. Maybe you work with sensor-based sorting. Do you have other ideas to determine the composition?
Yeah, first of all, it would be also my first choice to look at the manufacturing information from the manufacturer, from the producer. But when it's come to the end of life, you can also use sensors to look at the data and specify the alloys. When you use LIPS, for example, or also when you use X-ray, but it's very expensive.
Okay, so there are various sources, and yeah, so to collect data on compositions, and I just collected a few that we are actually using also in the project. So we look at EPD, so environmental product declaration databases, which is very much enforced for reporting environmental footprint of construction products. They have information on composition on a very generic level, I would say. So you can say how much metals, how much plastic, and yeah, so in this type of categories, you can go a bit finer. Then you find also information how much copper, but then they have just aggregated, for example, electronic components, and there you don't get much further. On this bill of materials level, some are published, so some manufacturers make it published, but it's still not very organized, this type of databases, and oftentimes they work with the so-called CAST numbers, so it's actually chemical specification and not really the information we would need to assess what secondary raw material come out. We also discovered, it's quite interesting, there is under the Waste Framework Directive the so-called SCIP database. Who knows the SCIP database or has worked with it? Nobody. The SCIP database was constructed under the Waste Framework Directive to enable safe recycling, to provide information on components that contain substances of very high concern. So it's a group of substances that are potentially health and environmental damaging. And if you use this type of substances above a threshold, you need to report in this database where you use it, in which component, and so on. It's very, but CRMs there are CMRs, but they are meant for classifying cancerogen, mutagenic, and CMR. There was one more, but not critical raw materials, which are maybe also substances of very high concern for society, are not reported here in this database. But this is really on a component level where producers have to report the content of their products. Digital product passport is something which is under development, and I think we maybe also should not only look at sustainability reporting to enable this product passport, but also to allow this type of forecast for secondary raw material based on product information. So this is a framework which may shape in the future. Waste sampling campaigns is actually something where we, in the preceding project Prosum, sourced lots of data from waste sampling and not from product databases, specifically for heterogenic products like electronics with a big variety. It's very difficult to define consistent data sets just based on product information, and to have, let's say, average coming back in the return flows was much more reliable information. And actually recyclers do this also on a regular level to see what's the value of their flows. We see also, for lots of money, you can download expert reports on composition, and so this type of data sources is there. And we see scientific literature, which actually is oftentimes just a mix of all the data sources mentioned above. There is we see used in reports on raw material and secondary raw material availability, mostly then using the data sources. What we now wanted to do with you, and I'm not sure how we are with time, but so we wanted now to do a little SWOT analysis. And can we change to the Miro board? So whatever you say now will be captured in this this framework, and we wanted to somehow collect maybe your perspective on the usability of some of those data sources. And maybe we can start with is it there? Can you zoom in maybe? Or okay. Okay. So maybe what I wanted somehow to cluster a bit their strengths and weaknesses and their opportunities and threats associated with this different data sources. And maybe we can start with the digital product passport information. Or what would be really also nice that we have a short introduction, that everybody shortly introduced from which angle you actually also, so where are you from which institution, and how do you look at this type of information on secondary raw material? What is your specific interest or perspective? Maybe you want to start to introduce that. We have a quick round, and then we better understand also the contributions.
I can start. My name is Sonia Cunha. I'm a postdoc at the University of Leiden, and I'm working in a variety of European projects related with secondary raw materials, recycling, traceability, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Heidi. I'm a PhD student from ETH, from the Circular Engineering for Architecture Lab. So we look at how to reuse building elements.
Valeria Superti. I'm working as project manager for the metal sector at EcoInvent. So we are collecting data on all the different processes. So it's important to also incorporate secondary raw materials.
Oh, I've forgotten my listing, actually, LCA databases as a potential source.
My name is Slauko. I work with the UN Economic Commission for Europe.
I'm Katrin Greif. I'm head of the Institute of Anthropogenic Materials Cycles at RWTH Aachen University. Yes, and I'm dealing also with on one hand with raw material, secondary raw materials. So we have conduct campaigns, sorting campaigns, like Susanne showed before. We also use sensors to check the material composition in different waste streams, plastics, but also metals and also construction demolition waste. And we also conduct LCA and MFA. So we need that data from the flows, from the waste flows, to use it in LCA and MFA, and to look at the sustainability.
Okay.
My name is Laird Wan from the World Resources Forum. I mostly work on recycling or circularity of critical raw materials, specifically within medical health devices.
Daniel Montfort from French Geological Survey. I'm involved in FutuRam, and I'm mostly dealing with many things, but material composition mostly for mining waste and also for any energy transition devices and equipment, so wind turbines, PV panels, because it's a very big question for us in terms of also of prospective model of new material demand.
Emiliano Tolusso from Erion. We are a PRO, Producer Responsibility Organization. So we are basically the middleman between producers and recycling plants, pretreatment plants mostly. And we work on different waste streams, especially and batteries.
And you have access to all this data?
Yeah, we have.
Hi, I'm Robin Gilly from the World Resources Forum. I work as project manager there, mostly on primary responsible sourcing of primary minerals, responsible mining. But I have a background in waste management, specifically mining waste management, and have developed a very large interest in the recycling of mining waste. That's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm James Horn from the WE Forum. I'm project manager there. Also involved in the FutuRam project. We are a membership organisation, of which Erion is one of our members. We're particularly interested in e-waste data, disseminate that to our members, particularly around composition, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and same for myself. I work in the WE Forum with James on the communication issues, together with Nanette, who is just over there.
Okay, so we see quite different aspects, and yeah, I wanted to maybe start with the digital product passport, because it's quite actually we thought that we would just save things and Sonia will put everything what you say on the but if you like to write directly, we also can share the link in the conference program, but then you can also put information afterwards. We want to continue on that.
It's not so organized yet.
So where do you see maybe for the digital product passport, so what information do we want or need to get out of in order to enable the assessment of secondary raw materials? Or where do you have questions or whatever comes across this aspect?
For the sourcing of some of these critical raw materials, no? I mean, the digital passport will theoretically say the cobalt comes from here or the copper comes from there.
That's a part that concerns another project where I'm involved, which is MadiTrace. So we have to discuss later maybe. But I think that mostly in digital product passport, we have also content. So we have how many cobalt it is contained in this battery. It is not only about the conditions of the mining, of if it comes from a responsible mining or not, but also how many cobalt we have it.
So you would cluster it as a strength or as an opportunity, or?
of course, it is an opportunity if this data is available and accessible for us also, and in which form. And
so that could relate then also to a threat that it's not accessible.
It's just the digital passport you're looking on now, right? Because I think it depends on what you want to use the data for. So you need different data when you want to make a sustainability assessment or just a quantification of secondary raw materials or critical raw materials. Then you need different data. And when you want to make conduct a sustainability assessment, you need much more data. Also, where does it come from, but how is it sourced, how is it mined, and what is coming beyond in the value chain. You need the whole data from the whole value chain and from all steps, and how it is worked with the material or the product, and how is the manufacturing conducted, and so on.
But can you maybe then formulate it for the, let's say, just to assess the content and the recoverability of it? Does it what is there? What should it have? Or how does it have to be regulated?
I think you need the content, but you also need to know what kind of materials or elements are in the product, and how the materials are combined, and so on, how you can really disassemble, thank you, disassemble the products and the materials. And as you showed before, the various levels, you have the waste stream, you have the product or the article level, you have the material level and the element level, and you have to have data on these different levels.
Maybe from a producer responsibility perspective, do you see there opportunities or strengths?
Well, when I read passport, I really read reliability and standardization. I think that, from my perspective, we have a lot of information that is fundamentally based on good estimations, brave estimations, and also wild guesses sometimes. And I do believe that the need for standardization is something that should be addressed. And I think that the digital product passport is an opportunity for doing this if we want to actually some form of governance into this discourse.
Do you see the end-of-life part sufficiently addressed in the discussion and the standardization right now?
No, not enough.
Not at all.
Not at all. No.
Okay. Or did you get invited to consultations or so?
Not me personally, and not recently, let's say.
Okay. More ideas about digital product passport, or?
I think it's also a threat or a weakness that the producers doesn't really want to share all data we want to have.
And we have also the recycled content, which is also a big issue in digital product passports. So, for example, for battery, there's some obligations of a certain recycled content in the product. So it is an information that we have to include, which is really useful for new demand, etc. So and to map the secondary flow in the products.
More on digital product passport, then I would maybe I have here still the expert market reports. Who of you has worked with some of those that are usually costing 10,000 euro? And anybody experience with?
Yes, in our mineral intelligence team, we buy this this kind of raw skill or this kind of reports, yeah. And very nice reports first. and they contain many information, mostly also in terms of what we are often missing is market share and prospective market share within products. And I think that they have, in many cases, they have insightful information about that.
Yeah. So that would be actually also maybe a weakness of the digital product passport, because then we know one product, but we don't know the multitude of products in the flow. So that's and the question is, what would be an algorithm to assess these market shares? And yeah. But if we talk with this morning, there was in the speech so also about it should be open, it should be transparent, and how do we get to this type of expert reports to make this knowledge also common goods? So isn't it a knowledge to better manage our products with knowing more? Or no. Okay, maybe last then that we touch also on waste sampling. Who of you did already waste analysis or waste sampling? Or one, two?
Some of our members have, some more extensively than others. The French member, has Erion done sampling as well? Yeah, but it's not across all countries. Don't cover all countries. It's just specific countries and some in more detail than others.
Yeah. So if you get composition data of a product, what do you do with it? How do you manage your data and how do you share your data?
First of all, we analyze our data ourselves, and when we did every analysis we wanted to do, we share it and give it to as an open source and publicate it. Also the sensor data, but it's kind of hard work and much time you need to get that data in that detail. And when you make a sorting campaign and you sort by hand, it's really time intensive, and that's why we want to try to implement more using sensors to get the data, also get the data in line from the plants. But it's in our interest, but it's not in the interest of the recyclers yet. They don't really have a need to know that data. That's also maybe a weakness also. And regarding the digital product passport, it would be helpful to have that data, and I think it might be a good concept in a B2B construct or concept, also business to business. But for post-consumer material flows, it might be really hard to have the Kennzeichnung, the labeling, thank you, of every product, and that you really find it. Yeah.
Any more on waste sampling?
The members of the WE Forum that do it, I'm thinking of one in particular, is quite guarded about the results, so they won't share the detailed results. It's a competitive market, so they do it for their own use, and don't necessarily share it. They'll share it at aggregated level, but not at a detailed level. It's their own information. It's expensive to produce, so they don't want to have their competitors viewing this information and getting an advantage.
there's also a question of representativity and uncertainties of this data. If you want to have a very representative data set of, for example, you have to sample tons and tons and tons because it's a very heterogeneous flow. So
and not just about the sampling, but also the analytics.
The analytics.
So because it's such a difficult sample to analyze, so depending who's measuring what, you get completely different results. So that's what I also wanted to add regarding sampling.
Yeah, specifically, if we come then to the CRMs, we did some analysis to try to, let's say, measure the periodic system in a product, and we spent together with EMPA lots of money on optimizing our analytics to get just one value for one sample, because the methods are not there, and it's quite hard also to avoid systematic bias in measuring specifically some of those spicy metals that are everywhere in those products. Maybe with regard on the time, maybe thank you very much for your input. If you have further views on that, you also can contact us after the workshop. We will extend this and processes and integrate it also in our project somehow. But from composition, because now we only know what goes into the treatment facility, the next step is then the next challenge, and Kirsten will continue on that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as Susanna already said, so we are just when we look at the this graph or the models that we have to fill with data, we just talk now about like put on market collection, maybe stock, but we haven't really touched the purple bit, the recovery. And I think here it's maybe like even more difficult to get data, and the data sources are even more scattered and not available and really not reliable. So the uncertainties are really, really high. So we want to look into this recovery data and what is needed, what kind of data do we need to fill this or to enable the framework with that. So what data do we need to describe the recovery processes? I think we are all clear that the facility process level is not depicted in the waste statistics. So there are other databases where we have on the facility level, like catasters, or to show the pollutants. There you have the facilities that are mapped and can be seen on a country level, but it's not regarding what is the inflow and the outflow of the facility. So it's not being shown. And also the process level is not, you cannot find this data. It's again the data sources that Susanna mentioned earlier, but even difficulty because the scientific publications, you have a super specific waste stream with a super specific technology, like focusing on super specific elements. So that makes it very, very difficult to find reliable data here. So what do we want to discuss with you today, or what's the next question we would like to get your feedback or your answers on? What needs to be changed to derive useful recovery data to manage secondary raw material? What additional data would be needed to be collected? So what data should be there to actually define or to enable these concepts, and who are the actors providing this data? So who are the stakeholders? Who should be responsible, or who should make sure that this data is being delivered? And so there's like several options, like tapping into other databases, existing databases, to see what's already there. Also, like who's giving the data about the processes. So we have the processes are being developed, like people do have this data, but so where is it? How can we get access to it? And maybe also standards. And so, and also your ideas. So I would like to open the floor again for the discussion about, so I think, Katrin, you already started to describe what data needed. So now we go really into this and do a little, which data must we have? Which data should we have? Which data could we have? And maybe which data also we shouldn't collect. I think there was also a question this morning, maybe we should do less. So maybe that is, it's up, I think, up left-ish. Yeah. Yeah, there it is. And so I put the questions up there again. So maybe zoom out, and Sonia is so nice to protocol again. So thanks a lot, Sonia, for doing this. This is really a good service, I think, for everybody, so you can think and don't have to bother about the documentation. So, Katrin, no, okay, Daniel,
No,
you're
no.
raising your hand, but yeah, please. So,
if I can share my experience in French case studies, all the industrial facilities are in database of industrial facilities, where you can find environmental permits, authorizations, and it's a very formal database which is maintained by authorities, environmental authorities. In this database, you can find, which is I think is one of the main information, is capacity, authorized capacity, and also storage weight, storage volumes that each plant can stock. So we don't have how many they are producing every year. We don't have how many, what they are really recycling. We don't have economic profit of this company, but at least we know that they are authorized to recycle 5,000 of tons of wheat every year. And that's public data. And I can imagine that this kind of database exists in European countries, because I think that it corresponds to a sort of mandatory of recycling of industrial. It concerns any industrial facility.
Maybe one question you sort of answered. It probably is in every European country to share this. In Germany, we are a federal state, so the information is on the federal state level and not on the national level. So we see here, so we have EU, we have national, but the data sits, let's say, it's partly 1 or 2 layers below. Some things are then, but would you see maybe there, or that there, let's say, there is at least a comparable data across the member states available, or?
I only know the case in France. I can imagine that it corresponds to some standards, but yeah, maybe we are dealing with some silos of national databases, even regional databases.
But you're using this data basis?
Yes, we are using very often for many things.
Okay.
And
but so then when data need is definitely have the for the processes.
Maybe one day I can share and in a demo what
yes,
is contained in the data.
But so the mass flows would definitely be like data, like about the processes, the what you say.
And just a little, it is very useful also for us for UNFC evaluation, this database, because it's a database that, okay, they had the permissions. So they are already in the full progress of this plant is done. If you are not in this database, that means that you are still not producing. So,
yeah, but maybe just to add, because I looked also with regard of UNFC into this, but many of the, for example, sorting plants and pre-processing plant, they don't have really those heavy permits, so they are not. You don't need an environmental impact assessment for getting the permit.
I don't know. In Germany, in France, we have two levels. One is authorization, environmental authorization. So you did an environmental impact assessment and you get the authorization of the authorities. And you have a low level, which is declaration. So you are just only declaring the activity that you are doing with any control.
But then
at least we have the information, but of 2 levels of environmental exigence. Yeah.
But then also again, we realize so the governance of the data needs to be addressed on some level, and it's different for countries again. So yeah.
Just to summarize, then the data that is available is capacity to recycle. That it's available, but not to everyone. It exists. The data that exists that you were mentioning in those databases is, in the end, the one that's relevant that we're discussing is capacity to recycle.
The waste capacity, annual capacity, waste treatment capacity, or also storage. We can also have how many volume they can storage in terms of.
So you have input
square meters of storage for wheat, for example.
But do you just have the input? You don't have the output. You just have input.
Yes.
So that's also something maybe
we
to
have
specify. And we need also the output data, because otherwise we don't know what's coming out. You know, you can get 10,000 tons of wheat, but still not get anything specific out of it. So then we would need input-output data. So that's something we...
Yes, and we don't know if they are doing either metallurgy and which process, and we don't have this level of information.
And this is data that we already have, but it's not available. So it must be available, it should be available, could be.
No, okay, it's available.
Yeah. Okay.
And we must have it. We must have it to describe our processes. Yeah.
I would have a question. Maybe you work for EcoInvent, and I ever learned that the law of mass conservation doesn't apply in LCA. But would you say that maybe LCA databases have relevant information that can be used on for example, also transfer coefficients and what is then produced in terms of secondary raw material? Or is that too generic, or is
I will have to check the details for the secondary flows, but we have some data sets for that, but it's still very, very generic. I think nowadays the information that users need are more granular than what is out there. So there is a really big room for improvement of this data.
Katrin, I think you also had, like to your previous email, Ivan had a comment, yeah.
Yeah, maybe regarding the waste streams, I think we have the input data, but we don't have any composition data, and not really specific to no daily data or something, just yearly data. And regarding the output, we really don't have any data. We just also for the pre-processing, the sorting plants, for example, maybe we could get data from the processors, from the recycler, regarding what output flows they do have, but we don't know what purity is in that, or and so on. So it's really, no good data, and it is not harmonized in Europe either. Just when you look at the recycling quotas, it's not a harmonized data. You can't really compare the quotas yet. We try to harmonize it now, but it's still not, we don't have the data yet. And regarding the LCA database, it's really generic processes in there, especially for the end-of-life treatments. And sure, there are transfer coefficients or something in there, but it's always just one process you looked at more deeply, and that's the process for everything. And you just chose that generic process, or you have to search for your own data and model it. Yeah.
So then you would say the data is also way too generic that we have. And also one thing I think is important, what you mentioned, the impurities. I think it's quite important to know the quality of the output, because when we go back to the aluminium example, I think it makes clear. So it really depends what is coming out of my aluminium smelter. And depends, like if I put in like high quality wrought aluminium and I get the cast aluminium out, I have won nothing. And so I think that makes also really important to then later like rate the recoverability, and not just mass based, as we also discussed already. So I think that's also a very important point. You mentioned you wanted also to have some addition.
Maybe one point out of the plant data, because oftentimes also the plants don't have it. If we look at the legislation. So most recycling targets are just mass-based. So they just measure the total flow, but not the composition, what comes out. And if we talk about critical raw materials or specific strategic raw materials, we don't know the transfer coefficients for specifically those elements, in addition to not knowing but I think this more also commodity focused recovery rates, if there would be an adoption of the legal framework that the targets are stronger to achieve certain recovery rates, then we would also have to install the monitoring for them, and then the data would become better.
It is for some small metals, what we see in France is a very confidential market in general. And if you are, I don't know, if you are recovering gold from some waste flows, you want to be very confidential and to remain confidential, I mean. So that's also, of course, because in some cases we can be faced to big companies, but also in some cases there are very small companies that specialize on a very small, very specific waste. So, but maybe that's also an opportunity that we can have in some cases expert and direct information from this industry if they want to share them. Some, for example, recovery rates, or maybe they don't say how many they are producing, but maybe they can share, yeah, that they are recovering 80%. But that requires a work of speak with each industry company.
Yeah, or maybe like a common framework that sets the goals so that people have to report this data. And I think what's also important that we somehow need data to understand where our key turning points are. So where should we focus? Because some elements, they not really, as you said, the goal is very interesting to economic reason, but we also have other elements that we decided now are strategic. And so we need to understand if this source, and I think it's also stated in the CRM Act, that we need to identify high potential waste streams that then can be fed into the recycling facilities. But for that, first of all, we need the data to understand, okay, where does it need to be collected and which recycling process can actually do that. So to really meet that requirement from the CRM Act, we need this data, because otherwise, how should I know where to collect and where to send if I don't know anything about these CRMs, strategic raw materials? So I think that's also another important point. And so we have a lot of must have, maybe we should have just not have, should have, could have, won't have, but Susanne, and then maybe we can have a won't have. So maybe you can think of that, what we shouldn't do.
No, actually, you mentioned the CRM Act, and there is this big criticality formula, and there is the end of life recycling rate. So if that is a continuous update, then we need somehow a framework that gives the information of end-of-life recycling rate cumulated over a specific economic area, and yeah.
But yeah, and so where is so it needs, then we are back at transparency. So how is this data generated? Is this data trustworthy? Is this data reliable? Can we trust in our models? And I think that is an important point. So we really need to get this data transparency to further understand and also enable other people. So if they understand what other people are collecting, maybe they can use the data and also get, like, you know, this snowball effect going. But I think for that, we first need to go into this transparency to enable other people.
And maybe if we talk about what we don't need the economic data, the details of the business models. We don't need the details on at which temperature and which chemicals they're using. And there are many data that we don't need. And
yeah, like the actual process data itself, like what, yeah. That, of course, then would be interesting again if you do like an LCA to understand the whole footprint, but like from just the point of view, so where to like put your focus, you don't need that data. Yeah.
Maybe also if a country is exporting a determined commodity, and we know perfectly that they don't have mining I don't know if Belgium is exporting, I don't know, certain commodity, but we have information and we know that there is no mining activity in Belgium, for example. So we can also track some flows with this kind of assumptions, you know.
Yeah, but then also what you're saying is to really make sure that our databases like are enabled to have a connection, to be able to speak to each other, to make sure that it's not siloed and softwares and that. And I think it's often we talk about developing software, we need to develop new software, but we don't make sure that the data that is used in that software is compatible or like interoperable with other things. And I think that is one of the most important tasks, to make sure that all the European databases that we have are interoperable. And if we can get that one done, then we can see that there's a lot of like databases we can tap into, and then maybe we already step further and nobody has to measure, because that's also what's written in the CRM Act, that there should be no like being stress created for the like producing people, or like for I think it's stated that only the big companies have to report this or something like that in that direction. Don't quote me on that. But I think regarding the time, is there anybody who has like a really strong opinion on what should not be collected? Susanne was quite opinionated on the business model. Anything else? Okay, I don't see anything. So I think thanks a lot for this nice discussion and for giving the feedback. And I think it's quite valuable. And I think with this, I hand over again to you, right? We will see.
Okay, yeah. So coming back maybe to the initial, and I just now want to maybe wrap up a little bit. We created this graph actually this morning, and as a process engineer, I'm really I love this type of flow diagrams, input, output, and I love mass balancing. And there's one law which applies to sorting facilities, but maybe also to modeling. There's this shit in, shit out. So if you put waste of low quality in, you cannot create gold. We don't have the right formula yet. And this is just basic physics, but also into models. If we put poor quality data into models, then the output is maybe also not so meaningful. And I think we need also to work on the frameworks that deliver data. And we see that there are many frameworks that already now contribute. And that is a little bit our vision that we have developed in the preparation. We try to map those frameworks of the EPSR, of the Waste Framework Directive, of the Critical Raw Material Act. I put the C in brackets. Actually, I'm not sure if we do not need a Raw Material Act instead of just a Critical Raw Material Act, and maybe to develop other frameworks and to have not thin gray lines in the system, but that they're all transparent and visible. Also, like, for example, what do we import with products, or what do we export with products? If we set targets of percentages, we have to understand actually then the flows here. And I think this is something what we have to communicate and maybe also in a dialogue to develop, because in a project like FutuRam, we will not work on, we will not change the frameworks that potentially deliver data, but we may make some suggestions that allow them to in the future make FutuRam, not that we have then after Prosum FutuRam. I'm not sure what then the third project could be. It's from a research perspective nice to have follow-up projects, but I think it should not be necessary. And that was actually my last slide. And so I think we saw a number of inputs and a good discussion, not a complete discussion because important stakeholders are missing here, and maybe that's also not the right framework of a scientific conference. And we have here also just part of the value chain, but I think we will get there. And yeah. Do you have something to add? Or?
No, thank you very much for the discussion. Oh, James has something to say.
I think there's a question from the online audience. I don't know whether they want to answer it now. It's quite specific, but.
So the question is from Lucia Xavier from the Center of Mineral Technology in Brussels. And the question is that under Working Group 5 in the Technical Committee of ISO Circular Economy is being discussed the product composition data sheet, if you have heard of that. Is there a link between FutuRam and this standard development team?
Okay, yeah. So we actually in another project on digital product passport, we one of my group members is just got into the mirror committee of this working group. So this ISO standard is under development, and so we have it on the radar, but also there what we see in terms of, because standardization, I think it's quite a powerful tool, but if we look at the current development in standardization, so we have ISO standards, but we also have many national standards and European standards on the way. And they sometimes lead more to disharmonization than to harmonization, because there is also a certain competition between the different standards from my perspective. Yeah, we observe those developments quite carefully. Then. Yeah, thank you very much for your participation. We can have, maybe we are earlier, or
we're just completely on time.
It's completely on time.
Oh, no, we are earlier. We have 7 minutes.
So we also have now some time for some side discussions. You also can take the flyer of the project or scan the QR code for the website. You can sign up for the newsletter and or for the LinkedIn or Twitter news feed. Yeah, specifically, we would be interesting also to hearing from you afterwards and for getting some data.